I used to be an introvert when I was a child. And I just loved to be alone in my corner, just to think and to dream. And, usually after watching, I call this moment of mine the imagination trips. And usually after watching superhero movies like, the Batman and the Captain Planet and the Superman, I'll just go back to my corner just to imagine myself flying over my community, catching the bad guys and putting smiles on the faces of people and making a difference in my community, at least making people smile. Well, obviously not the bad guys. And these adventures that I imagined were epic. And I actually cherished my imagination trips because I didn't really grow up living with my parents. And at a point, some of the family members that I lived with would call me names. Some would call me dump, unimshe, those kind of words. And some friends in school as well will call me funny names. And so I just loved to be alone with myself, to think and to dream. Fast forward 10 years down the line, here I was, a teenager, trying to discover myself, trying to discover my passion, my purpose, and my potentials. And, my childhood imagination trips had done something profound to me. They developed in me the passion to see change in my community, at least to imagine myself being a Captain Planet, making a change. And probing later into why in the first place we had challenges in my community and other friends' communities, I later discovered at age 17 that our problem was leadership. 2 years down the line, it was time for me to go to the university, to go and study computer science. And here again in the university community, I saw challenges. I had my personal share of challenges. For example, I studied computer science for 4 years, but I never owned a personal computer. I was part of the less than 10% people in the class that didn't have their own computers. We had to do whatever we could because we couldn't afford it, and there were not enough computers in the lab. And so I remember, would borrow computers to study at night, learn how to code, develop websites, and do designs. I remember my very first website that I designed, I had to use 4 different computers. Because each time in the middle of the programming, the owner, hey, my computer. And then I'll put everything onto a flash drive, find a next available computer, do all installations again, 4 different computers. And I was glad, this website has been through a lot, And so this experience and other experiences on campus made me become an entrepreneur. I began solving basic IT problems, to get some money to survive on campus. And as well, when I was in school, I loved to volunteer, to find challenges in rural communities, rural Ghana villages. And at times, some of the stories we saw on the ground were heartbreaking, but just the thought of being able to put a smile on a child's face would make me glad. A few years down the line, this passion of mine thickened, especially because I was hearing on radio and watching on news that African country this happened, that African country this happened, and I recall night I'll just be in the room at dawn, 2:30 a.m., 1 a.m., just thinking and shedding tears. God, what is wrong with Africa? What is wrong with us? Why are we still poor? And it was a typical passion state like this that led to the development of 1 billion Africa. And just the thought of 1 billion problems being solved by, being tackled with 1 billion projects by the 1 billion Africans to create a better Africa formed the aha moment for me. And so we started 1 billion Africa, and it's developed to become a problem-solving movement, a civil society organization that inspires and empowers Africans, especially the youth, to find problems in their communities and to turn them into projects, right? And so it's, the journey has been an amazing one, and we are in over 9 other African countries. We've run about 19 projects that have impacted over 10,000 Africans, majority being youth and children. And Thank you. And, you know, Chad here is a typical example of a youth within the 1 Billion Africa Network who found a problem in his community and turned it into a project. So Chad comes from the northern part of Ghana, and in his community, interestingly enough, some children in the community do not love, of course, I mean, this is not even interesting enough. Not all children love to go to school. But the most surprising part of it is that some parents would rather have their children accompany them to the farm than go to school. So Chad, being inspired by the 1BA mission, decided to turn this problem into a project. And he's come up with a beautiful project called a Child to School project that uses innovative activities to make children fall in love with school in that community, right? And there are many more problem to project stories in the 1 Billion Africa Network in Ghana, South Africa, in Namibia, and other African countries. We have a project that is starting soon in Botswana. And this has inspired us to begin to develop regional units, you know, in sub-Saharan Africa to help coordinate some of these projects that go on in these places. And very soon we are as well coming up with 1BA Summit. That is going to be a very inspiring environment where all these change makers come to share their problem to project stories and to engage with global leaders. But friends, it hasn't been all easy, you know. The road hasn't been all rosy. My team and I have had to deal with disappointment and some very crazy challenges. For example, we had this very important Skype meeting with a key partner in the United States. And I mean, I was all ready for this Skype call. It was supposed to happen at 5 p.m. Just 1 minute, you know, I was just doing the testing, you know, the sound check and all those things, just ready. 1 minute to 5 p.m. Can you imagine this? The light went out. The whole area, including the next area. How are you going to explain this to a partner in the United States? You know, but all these hindrances do not deter us from what we want to achieve. And I actually thought that, thank you. Thank you. I actually thought that our challenges in Ghana were unique to us until I heard of the story of Charles Bati from Uganda, and that's another one. So that's Charles. You know, that was the same year I made the New Year resolution to stop. It's enough making friends in Ghana. I want to move outside Ghana. How many of you here have at least 20 friends from other African countries? 20 friends. Okay. 50 friends. 100 friends. Okay, 2 friends. Yes. So I discovered the story of Charles. Charles comes from a community in Uganda called Kamwocha. And this is one of the most impoverished slum communities in Uganda. Growing up in this community characterized with, you know, poverty, poor health, crime, drugs, and so on, and lack of opportunities, he developed the insatiable desire, you know, to be the Captain Planet in his community, to cause a change over there. And so when he was 20 years old, he gathered some savings he had gotten from a part-time job working at a car garage. And he started a farm in his community. And this farm grew to employ 50 people at the end of each season, right? And 3 years after, in 2011, Charles gathered some money from the farm to start a family health center in his community. Now, when I read this story, I was so inspired. But as well, I discovered that there were challenges, that word again, challenges in Charles' story. In fact, Charles' story inspired me to probe into what was happening all across Africa. And so that was when I discovered the story of, you know, Seppo Seloni from South Africa and what he was doing through his project in Imbewu. And that's Seppo over there. And I read about Rana Karana from Mauritius, how passionate she was about making a difference in her environment. I watched videos of Ori Okolo sharing her story, how passionate she was about Kenya and Africa. And at the same time, I discovered the beautiful thing Fred Swanika was doing with Africa Leadership Academy in South Africa. I want you to follow me as I share these stories. Because their stories and my story made me come to a single conclusion that I thought maybe our destinies as African youth are connected together. And I believe that, there are so many challenges around us, but if we continue to persist and thrive, gradually we can make Africa a better place. And this is the rule that I believe in, that as African youth entrepreneurs or as African youth, our role, all right, is to help build Africa from the ground up. So that when we roll up sleeves, 1 Billion Africa project, we are helping people on the ground develop that problem-solving mindset. And my friends, Jessica and Yao, are also doing their own. Gradually, we help build Africa from the ground up. And for the good leaders, some of the good leaders we have on the continent, they affect Africa from the top to the bottom. That is the rule that I believe in. And, I believe Africa's transformation story would not only depend on President Buhari from Nigeria or President Paul Kagame from Rwanda. Africa's transformation story would also depend on you. I want you to look at your neighbor and tell that person the story will depend on you. Yes, it is very true, because the transformation story of Africa would also depend on our decisions as young people. Not just that, but as well our indecisions. I discovered a prophecy recently in the Bible about Africa, and I was excited. Hey, Africa in the Bible, And it's found in Joel chapter 2, verse 28, that says that your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Now, I paraphrase. Your old men and women shall dream dreams, and your young men and women shall see visions. It meant a lot to me. To me, it meant that the Kwame Nkrumahs and the Patrice Lumumbas will dream dreams of a better Africa. But the Kofi Eboas and the Yaos and the Jessicas and the Lalumbe Makuyas in South Africa are the ones to help behold that vision. Are you following? To break that dream to reality, to see that vision. And that is our role as young people in Africa. That is why I believe we are the ones Africa has been waiting for. And this is why we can't afford to play the blame game and be pointing fingers. Hey, you are supposed to do that. You didn't do that. This is why I believe we have to act to fulfill the dreams of our old men and women. And that is why we can't lose sight of the ultimate to settle for the immediate. And this is why we need to take the responsibility to effect the change we want to see in Africa. Demographically, Africa is the youngest continent in the world, with over 70% of the 1.1 billion people in Africa being young people. We are the youthful continent, and we can't afford to waste time growing up with the victim's mentality, but to embrace the victor's mentality, right? And, I believe for the African youth who truly, and I emphasize the word truly, who truly want to effect change or see Africa transform, that person or that youth would not waste time highlighting the red lights on the continent. We know the red lights, right? Corruption, the disease, famine. Nowadays, we don't even have famine, and all these red lights. That African youth would rather highlight on the green lights we have on the continent. Yes, we do have green lights. That African who truly want to see transformation on the continent would at least attempt to make an effort, attempt to make a move. Even if it has to do with Trotro diaries or fashion, you would attempt to at least take the problem to a different level, And for example, we see some good leaders on the continent, Strive Masiyiwa, Tony Elumelu, Kofi Annan through his foundation, and many more examples. Even when you come to the level of our youth, they are all telling us that, guys, it is possible. 1 Billion Africa, through our project, keep empowering and inspiring the African youth that it is not a fairy tale to attempt to find a problem and turn it into a project, that it is possible. People, Madiba believed in the power of the youth. Bill Gates gave a lecture recently, I think a few days ago, in Pretoria, and he quoted Madiba, emphasizing how he believed in the power of the African youth. We need to identify and understand this youth. I mean, this power that we have within us. Let me end this talk with a call. And I make a call today to our leaders in the African Union offices in Addis, Ethiopia, and the rest of East Africa. I make a call today to the new leaders that we have seen emerging from the leadership corridors of Cote d'Ivoire and some other parts of West Africa. I make a call today to our leaders in civic leadership and public management and in government in the SADC region, including that head teacher in Tembisa community in South Africa. I make a call today to our leaders in North Africa and to our mothers and fathers in Central Africa. I make a call today to them to help develop the support systems we need in Africa, to involve us in creating the enabling policies that Jessica's fashion business and Trotro Diaries will thrive on. I make a call to our leaders to make us their priority, to trust us, to invest in us. And then I make my second call to you here, to the one who would watch this talk, to the Africans in the diaspora, that guys, this is not the time for juvenile stuff. Say, hey, you are better than this. Hey, I'm better than you. I want that award. You are not doing anything. You know, this is not the time for all those things. This is the time to lay our brick together. Each brick is important to help build the walls of Africa. This is the time to move Africa forward in our actions than keep Africa stationary in our inactions. Thank you very much. God bless you.